Hi guys, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be reviewing the entire A Darker Shade of Magic trilogy. This video is going to be spoiler free and mostly just going to be focusing on all the things that I liked, things that could have been better, and I'm just going to try to give like a good overview so you can kind of decide for yourself if you think this book is something for you. And then at the end there will be like a short spoilery section. The Shades of Magic series by V. Schwab consists of A Darker Shade of Magic, A Gathering of Shadows, and A Conjuring of Light. I just finished this book, so we're going to talk about the entire series. This is a high fantasy story surrounding around the premise that there are actually 4 dimensions that are all connected through London. Our London in our world is grey London, there's no magic, but then you have red London where there is a lot of flourishing magic, there is white London where magic has been corrupted, and then black London where magic has destroyed the entire dimension. And we follow a guy, Kel, from red London, who is a very rare magician called an enquiry, which means that he can travel through the different dimensions. He works for the king so he can bring messages from one London to the other, but aside from that he also sometimes smuggles magical artifacts from different Londons. At one moment this leads him to come across a very dangerous element, and that kind of sets the plot into motion. But if you look at the grand scheme of the story, it's way more than that. It's mostly just like a fun high fantasy adventure story. So let's first talk about A Darker Shade of Magic. Although I absolutely love the series as a whole, the first book I thought was nice, but not great. I gave it 3 stars. It mostly has a lot of potential. Most of the things that I enjoyed about this book are the setting with the red Londons and all the different Londons is so vivid and original, and I really felt like I was there. And the writing is something that I really like. V. Schwab writes like a fairy tale is written, not flowery or very literary, that's not what I mean, but you know those old fairy tales that are kind of written in a rather witty way? That's what her writing style reminds me of. Her writing style is very simple, but not simple in the way that it's like easy and not good, but simple in the way that she is extremely accurate in perfectly describing things with only using few words. But aside from those great things, the plot in the first book is rather standard. Most of the conflict is external. The entire plot is driven by this dangerous magical item that Kel finds, and it's only later in the series that we get more character-driven plot, which is my personal preference. Also, the villains in this story are kind of evil, crazy, bad guys that don't have a lot of depth. In my opinion, they're just evil because they're just evil, terrible people. And again, not my personal favorite, but it gets better in the other books. And then lastly, in this first book, the characters to me were just not there. They had potential, but I just didn't really connect to them. The main character, Kel, didn't do much for me, but I actually ended up loving him later in the series. He's now my favorite character. And then the other main character is Lila Bard, who is a thief. She fights with her knives and she's very stubborn. I actually really did not like her. She's a very divisive character. Some people really like her and other people really don't. I'm personally on the team of people who don't really like Lila, but I think it's very important to note that liking a character is different from thinking a character is well written. And although I personally don't really like Lila because I tend to not really like those stubborn, overly confident characters, I do think she's well written, and especially throughout the series I learned to understand her more. But all these problems are resolved in the next 2 books, which in my opinion is where the story really starts taking off. I gave A Gathering of Shadows 5 stars. This one is my favorite out of the series, and A Conjuring of Light is going to be getting 4 or 5 stars. I'm not quite sure yet because I just finished it. The world completely opens up. We see more of the world. We are introduced to more characters, so we get more character dynamics and character development, and we get more different interesting villains. So now I'm going to be talking about this series in general, and let's just start with the things that I liked, and then we'll get into some criticisms or possible things that you might not like. My favorite thing about this series are the characters, which makes sense because I'm a very character-driven reader. In the second and third book we get way more characters, and that actually made all the characters more interesting, because V. Schwab's writing shines when she writes character dynamics. So I mostly loved all these characters because of the way they interacted with each other, and V. Schwab is especially extremely good at writing character conflict. So all of my favorite character dynamics were between people that didn't like each other. There's a fantastic rivalry plotline going through this story, which is something that always it's one of those things that I always love when I see it, a rivalry plotline. And we have the found family trope, which I'm always a fan of, because all these different characters kind of start working together as a team. And that always makes me happy. Especially book 2 is almost entirely character driven, because we have to introduce all these new characters and develop the ones we already know further. So yes, in this book, for the majority of the book, nothing really happens, and I understand that people criticize this book for. I personally didn't mind, because I really love reading about characters. This series is also the only fantasy series that I've ever read where the multiple perspectives don't bother me, because usually when there's multiple perspectives in fantasy, you get multiple storylines. You basically switch between plots every time you switch POVs, and usually that annoys me because I always pick favorites. There are always a few POVs and storylines that I don't care about, but in this series, I didn't mind. This is the only series that I've ever read where I didn't mind that. I liked everything that happened. And I think the reason for that is that every POV and every storyline is still clearly connected, because all the characters have already met in some kind of way, and as a reader you know that the stakes for one storyline really influence the stakes for another storyline. So if you're someone that's a little hesitant about reading so many POVs, this is the only one that I've read where I actually liked it. The second great thing about this book is the adventure. This series is very low on the political intrigue and very high on the adventure and action. I was constantly at the edge of my seat. It's very fast-paced, and there are pirates. And if there are pirates, of course there's going to be great adventure. And the third great thing about this book is the writing, but I already talked about that. But I'm personally a huge fan of V. Schwab's writing, but we already knew that because she's my favorite author for a reason. Now let's get into a few criticisms that I had of the story that might be good to keep in mind when you're considering picking up this series. The first one, and the biggest one for me, was the element of convenience. There were many instances during this series that I felt like just convenient things happened and the characters got out of trouble way too easily. Either because some new bit of magic is being discovered or because antagonists just give in too easy. And also regarding the characters, I would have liked to see character flaws get in people's way a little bit more. Like for example, Lila, like I said, although I don't really like her, I can see that she's a well-written character, but I would have liked to see her flaws actually get in her way and form obstacles for her, and didn't really see that. And that brings me to my second criticism, and that is about character arcs. Some characters in this series have fantastic character arcs and undergo a lot of growth. But there are also characters that seem to only grow in power, like externally, but not internally. So the characters that do get development are fantastic and they are my favorites, but I would have liked the other characters to also get some internal personality development, and that sometimes was a little too absent in this series. And then my last criticism is on the romance. It's very small because romance plays a very small part of this series, but we do have two major couples. And I gotta admit, I don't know if anyone else had this problem, but in A Gathering of Shadows, I loved the romances. And then when we got to A Conjuring of Light, I stopped caring. And I think that is because this book completely relies on the tension that was built up in its prequel. There were 3 years between me reading book 2 and book 3, and I really noticed that barely any of the romance and tension and sometimes even character traits were barely even reintroduced in book 3. So because it took me 3 years to read this book, I really noticed the lack of reintroduction, and I couldn't rely on carrying over my feelings from book 2. And in my opinion, I think each book, even though it's a series, you shouldn't rely on what was established in the first book, and you should reintroduce tension and reignite certain romance plot lines. So the romances and even characters that really shined in book 2 to me kind of fell flat in book 3. But yeah, because this series in general was rather low on the romance, it didn't really bother me that much. Overall, I really loved this series. So even though A Gathering of Shadows was not super special to me, just reading the entire series, I've just like fallen in love with the whole thing. So if you stopped reading the series after A Gathering of Shadows because you just didn't connect with the story and the characters, keep reading because the characters get a lot more attention in the later books. And if you are looking for a fantasy book with a very unique concept, with just the different worlds and the way they are described, and the role color plays in this world is extremely unique and very visually interesting. If you like lots of adventure and action in your stories, and if you like the found family trope, then I highly recommend this series. I know this is a very popular series, so I'm probably like preaching to the choir here. I just wanted to talk about it. I know no one watches reviews, so if you're here, thank you. That's amazing. I'm just trying to do more reviews because I wanna kind of learn to be better at voicing my opinion, I guess. So I'm just gonna do them. If you have any tips or ideas for further reviews, let me know. Hello. I don't look camera ready at all. I'm not wearing makeup, but I just had a few things that I wanted to talk about because now it's time for spoilers. So if you haven't finished a book, then skip ahead to this timestamp. But for now, I'm gonna talk about little things to the people who have actually read the entire series. Okay, so spoiler time. Okay, so Lila being an Antari, or just having magic in general, I'm gonna admit I wasn't really a fan of that. I liked the fact that she couldn't use magic and that she was still cool, so I was a little bit annoyed with it. I liked that it made her able to go to the Essentosh and just the entire magical tournament. Really cool, but was it very necessary? I'm not personally a fan. I was mostly happy that I was so scared that Rai was gonna turn out to be magical as well. I'm really glad that he didn't, because I liked his character arc, grappling with the fact that he's a king but that he doesn't have any kind of magic. I kind of saw it coming that Lila was an Antari, because the moment we learned that she had one eye that was fake, I was like, huh, so there's one eye of which we don't know what it actually looks like? What could that be? And then she turned out to be an Antari. One of my favorite characters became Holland. I think it's not a surprise that I'm a big fan of Holland as a character. Already in the first book with Astrid and Athos, I noticed that he was like the more interesting one of the bunch, and he got better and better throughout the series. And then when we got his like whole rivalry thing in A Conjuring of Light, oh my gosh, that was my favorite thing of that book, just them kind of becoming allies. My favorite thing in books is, well, not my favorite thing, but one of my favorite things in books is when rivals save each other's lives. I don't know why, but it's like that moment where it's like, oh, they're dying. Oh, this is like finally the moment that I've been looking for. No, shit, I gotta save them. And the last thing that I want to mention is Kel and Lila's romance. I remember really shipping them in A Gathering of Shadows, like the build up to them meeting at the Essentosh, and then when they basically met but I didn't realize that they were each other. Oh, that was so good. They kept like missing each other. That was so well written. There was so much build up to their romance and I was shipping it so much. But then in A Conjuring of Light, that completely fell away and I didn't care about them anymore. So let me know if anyone else had the same experience, but I thought that their relationship in A Conjuring of Light was just not very interesting. There wasn't any tension anymore. There wasn't the tension that I felt in A Gathering of Shadows. And Cal was suddenly very smooth. I was like, what? I don't know, it felt really weird to me. So let me know what you guys thought of that romance, because I just have very mixed feelings. And I think that was it for my spoilery thoughts. I just had to rant about these few little things that I couldn't put in the non-spoiler section. But yeah, let's go back to non-spoiler me. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope you enjoyed this series. You know, if you want to talk spoilers with me, you can do so in the comments, but don't forget to like start your comment with like a big spoiler warning, but then we can talk spoilers in the comments. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon in another one. Goodbye!